Zaffer presents Bridget's War, written by Shirley, Mann and read by Laura Brydon. This audiobook is brought to you by Memory Lane, a special community for the very best saga writing. Join us today at memorylane.club. Chapter 1. Port Erin, Isle of Man, January 1943. Bridget's heavy policewoman's shoes resounded in the streets of Port Erin as she ran towards the beach below. She put all her concentration into getting to the angry shouting she could hear at the bottom of the hill, ignoring the familiar shop frontages. At the piercing sound of a scream, she quickened her pace. Bridget looked behind her to see if there was any sign of backup, but the streets were depressingly empty. "Bugger," she hissed. Swearing was a new skill she had learned during her police officer training in London, but she was not sure the satisfying expletive was going to be enough to help her deal with this situation. Ahead of her, she saw a group of people crowded into the narrow path by Christian's cottage, silhouetted in the last rays of winter sunlight. As usual, it was a mix of arrogant Nazis, German Jews hanging back, trying to vanish into the background, and some fascist followers of Oswald Molesley, who looked as if they were on their way to a cocktail party. As Bridget neared the commotion, the crowd stepped back, looking at her with relief and anticipation. Feeling anything but the saviour they were all expecting, Bridget stepped forward. All right, what's going on here?" she asked in the same commanding voice she had used as Lady Bracknell in one of her school plays. But then she breathed in sharply. Glistening in the weak January light was a serrated kitchen knife. It was being held by a tall woman in her 30s, with faded peroxide blonde hair and wearing a floral pinny. Bridget identified her at once as Helga Fischer, one of the fierce Nazi supporters at Russian internment camp. At her feet was the curled figure of a girl with hands clasped protectively over her head. The outline of her assailant cast a dark shadow, just like a blood stain, over the tarmac all around. Bridget edged slowly forwards, recognising the pale face of a timid Jewish girl, Ursula Appler, panting with terror at Helga's feet. The next few seconds could mean the difference between life and death for her. Bridget's mind was racing. How was she going to deal with this? "Now, Helga, hand me that knife," Bridget said slowly, reaching out her hand towards the German woman and inwardly cursing whichever landlady had failed to lock it away. "You don't want to end up in prison now, do you? What do you do in the next minute will make that decision for you." Helga's eyes darted around her, as if trying to work out where the voice was coming from. They finally focused on Bridget. "You do not understand. She took my soap," she said in broken English. "And," she added, looking at the Nazi supporters in the crowd for approval, "she is a Juden." There was a shuffling amongst the different factions in the group, with some gasping at the bitterness of the accusation, while the Nazis murmured that Jews deserved everything they got. For women in the internment camp on the Isle of Man, soap was a commodity as valuable as gold, but the severity of the crime suddenly took on a completely different perspective. To some, Hitler was a leader whose hatred of the Jews was to be applauded, but to others, the young girl's religion made her plight even more pitiable. "I know," Bridget said in a voice calculated to calm the tension, "but it's not worth risking a long jail sentence for. You've never been to prison, Helga, but I can tell you, you won't like it, and what about your little girl?" Seeing the woman hesitate gave Bridget confidence. With more twists and turns to her life than anyone on the island suspected, Helga exuded a ferocity that terrified those weaker than her. But Bridget was not going to be cowed. She didn't know much about this woman, but she did know that her Achilles' heel was her little girl, Karin, and Bridget felt if she was ever going to
Sample complete. Ready to continue?